All right, peace. This your boy Draw Ya back with another video. We're gonna talk about the money system, and we're gonna tie this into the beast, the fourth beast in Daniel 7 and Revelation 13. So let's get going. So Daniel chapter 7, verse 7. After this, I saw in a night vision, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were three of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. So the question we all need to ask, what I want to propose is, why is the U.S. government in 29 trillion gross federal debt? And a lot of people, they don't really have that answer. I mean, even in the U.S. government, the economists don't really have a good answer for that. And if you ask people today, they might say, "Oh, because we're in, war, or we owe a lot of money because of just cost of living." But what if I told you this all wasn't occurring in the beginning of the inception of America? This is more like a recent debt, like in the last 120 years. It's been pretty recently, and we're going to talk about how this all occurred. So first, we have consumer goods and capital goods. So consumer goods are what we would call natural resources like spices, sugar, cotton, land, water. And capital goods are gold, silver, diamonds, precious metals, or minerals, things that we can use for currency. So at one time, gold, for instance, was used as a way to account the amount of consumer goods as an accounting system. So eventually, people decided that it would not be safe to keep all this gold in their homes due to thieves. People would come in and steal it. So people decided to put the gold in a safe place. That's where we get a bank from. So the banks would issue a receipt to show how much gold you had in the bank account. So people would carry this receipt around instead of carrying a big bag of gold. And eventually, the receipt was used as real money. That's how we get paper currency from. You see, paper currency is fine as long as it's backed by gold and silver. But in the Federal Reserve, Federal Reserve Act in 1913, passed by Woodrow Wilson, they made it a law where they did not make gold and silver basically uh, part of the standard. It was beginning part of where paper currency started becoming more in circulation. And the federal government is also not part of the U.S. government. It's a private bank, and it has the power to print money, um, because the U.S. government by Congress doesn't have the ability to print money based on the Constitution. They have the ability to coin money, but they can't print it. So the Federal Reserve is able to print money, and they can print more money, which can cause inflation. And they use this to control the U.S. government by putting the American people in debt. So we need to understand how this happened, because this didn't happen overnight. So first, this is back in 1756 when the French and Indian War, or the Seven Years' War, broke out between the two dominant powers in North America, Britain and France. Basically, an imperial struggle for land. By the end of the war in 1760, the British had effectively driven the French out of America, gaining control of the territory from the east coast to the Mississippi River. The 1763 Treaty of Paris ceded all French lands to Britain and decided the colonial fate of the continent. Shortly after the end of the war, the British government dropped its policy of salutary neglect and attempted to gain tighter control over its holdings in North America. Further, the British wished to force the colonies to share in the responsibility for the monumental debt built up during the French and Indian War. So, Britain was in great debt after this war, and they wanted the colonies to help chip in. There's a quote by Benjamin Franklin: "That is simple. In the colonies, we issue our own money. It's called colonial scrip. We issue it in proper proportion to the demands of trade and the industry to make the products pass easily from the producers to the consumers. In this manner, creating for ourselves our own paper money, we control its purchasing power and we have no interest to pay." So the 13 colonies, they were doing really well with their economy because they used money that wasn't overinflated. They had enough gold and silver to back up the money that they were using in their circulation. And the British government, they saw that, they understood that. That's why they wanted the colonies to help pay off their debt. So what the British government had done was they had the 13 colonies request bonds as loans to the U.S. so they could use the money in their U.S. economy. However, the U.S. would have to pay back these loans or these bonds with interest or usury. So, and also the British government was taxing the U.S. imports and goods. So this caused a lot of frustration amongst the 13 colonies and eventually led to the Revolutionary War. Um, and a lot, so the British government, they were, they were kind of trying to uh, scam or probably, try to get over on the colonies by charging them with these loans and paying them and charging them with extra interest so they could pay it back with interest. And the 13 colonies they weren't having that. So they staged an event called the Boston Tea Party in December 16th, 1773, incident where they threw out 342 chests of tea belonging to the British East Indian Company overseas, and they dressed up as Mohawk Indians. And Americans were protesting both the tax on tea, taxation without representation, and perceived monopoly of the East Indian Company. And when they say they're dressed up as Mohawk Indians, they're saying that they dressed in blackface because the Indians or the Aboriginal Americans were so-called black people at that time. But this was a stage event where they made this happen so the British government will get mad and they will come over and pretty much stop this rebellion. And it made the American people at the time, or the people in the 13 colonies, get upset at the British government, and it really raised a level of patriotism within the people, and that's what kind of helped fuel the desire to be a part of this war for independence. So again, we're going to see this as a constant theme where they stage an event, they stage chaos, and then or they stage a problem, and then they provide a solution afterwards. That's the what we call the Hegelian dialectic, or that's really how America does a lot of things to get things done. And then the Continentals, that refers to paper currency issued by the Continental Congress in 1775 to help fund the American Revolutionary War. Continentals quickly lost value, partly because they were not backed by a physical asset like gold or silver, but also to the fact that too many bills were printed. So the American colonies, they were using this to fund the war, but this also was being printed too much, so it caused inflation. So it caused their money to kind of get out of proportion, and it caused them to have their economy kind of started to get unstable. So now we're going to go into the banking history. So the banking, currency, and monetary policy was a source of great controversy in the early United States. In 1791, Congress established the original Bank of the United States, masterminded by Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. Now, people know Alexander Hamilton now based off the musical, which is pretty good, actually, by the way. But Alexander Hamilton, he was actually a man of a mixed ethnicity. His mother was from the Caribbeans. She was from St. Kitts. That's where he was born. And his father was a Caucasian man, actually a Jewish Caucasian man. And he ended up becoming the first Treasury Secretary. But his job was to establish this bank because he was, well, I don't want to cause any speculation about him, but he was able to start the first national bank. Did he have ulterior motives? I believe so, but that's my speculation. But continuing on, conflict over the bank caused a split within George Washington's administration that would later widen into the formation of the nation's first two political parties: Hamilton's Federalists and the Democratic Republicans led by Thomas Jefferson. With Jeffersonians in control, the charter for the original bank expired in 1811. So the first original bank was for 20 years, from 1791 to 1811. They wanted to renew this charter, but the nation kind of, they weren't really feeling the charter like that. And so that led to the nation's financial struggles during the War 1812, when the British came over and they started another war and they burned down the White House. And but this was all based off the bank charter, the renewal of the bank charter. So it led Congress to charter the second bank of the United States for 20 years, starting in 1816, and it funded with $35 million, a gigantic sum at the time. After struggling in its early years, the bank built a solid reputation by the end of the 1820s under the leadership of its third president, Nicholas Biddle. And so now we see that this national bank is being established in America. But as you see, it's already causing a debt in the people. So it's 35 million so far under Nicholas Biddle, but it's giving people this belief that the bank is helping them because it's able to give out loans, is able to, establish businesses by giving out loans, people being able to buy land and things like that, and that's what banks do. But the people are understanding that they're being led into debt, and to led into that interest trap. The same way modern day today, we buy everything off credit. And one thing is, credit is cool if you're able to pay back your credit in a timely manner. But if you default on your credit, or you go into like uh, um, where you um, defer your loan, your interest rates, or your interest increase. Your rates can always increase as well, depending on the bank and the situation of the economy. And so you can end up paying a lot more than the original loan that you took out. And so this is what President Jackson was worried about. So let's read about that. Among those who distrusted the second bank in the United States was Andrew Jackson, the Tennessee war hero who was elected president in 1828. As the champion of the common man, Jackson opposed the concentration of power in the hands of a powerful few, like Biddle, who was from a prominent Philadelphia family, at the expense of ordinary farmers and workers. As president, Jackson made no secret of the fact that he opposed the bank's upcoming recharter in 1836. The bank was popular with many Americans, however, and Jackson's opponents, including Senator Henry Clay of Kentucky, convinced Biddle to seek on early recharter before the election of 1832, betting that Jackson would not veto the charter if Congress passed it. So Jackson, when he became president, he vetoed the charter. In his veto message, Jackson directly contradicted the Supreme Court's 1819 ruling in McCulloch versus Maryland, which held that the Bank of the United States was constitutional. He claimed the right for himself as president to judge its constitutionality, independent of Congress or the courts. The bank's charter gave the institution too much power over the nation's financial markets, he argued, power that enabled it to generate huge profits for its stockholders, most of whom were foreigners and our own opulent citizens. So he's saying that all these people who are gaining money off the American people are these foreigners, these international bankers, these global bankers, and also these opulent citizens, these rich systems, these rich people. So he saw how the banks were creating this class system where it was making a small amount of people rich, but it was still keeping the American people in this kind of subjugated state because they were becoming debt slaves, and he didn't like that because Andrew Jackson was a real man of the people. He was really came from that humble upbringing. So and he went to war, and he was a very uh, common man, and he really had the he really based off history, they say he had the best interests of the people, of the American people. And financially, I could see that because he really did see the danger of having a bank have that much control of the American people. So, continue. If we must have a bank with private stockholders, every consideration of sound policy and every impulse of American feeling admonish that it should be purely American, Jackson wrote. But the real evil of the bank, Jackson claimed, was its creation of a privileged class of Americans with too much money and political power. It is to be regretted that the rich and powerful too often bend the acts of government to their selfish purposes, he wrote. This was unjust and dangerous to the humble members of society, the farmers, the mechanics, and the laborers, who have neither the time nor the means of securing like favors to themselves. So, and since Jackson had these thoughts, and he opposed his national bank, there were multiple assassination attempts on Jackson's life. But the national U.S. debt was eliminated during Jackson's presidency, and I really believe that's why a lot of historic history textbooks, they really kind of rake him over the coals. They really don't really show Jackson a lot of respect for the financial decisions he's made. I'm not saying every decision he made was right, based off with the deportation of a lot of the natives in the land, and some of the decisions he's made in regards to his affiliations. But in regards to his financial decisions, I mean, you can't really argue with someone who cleared the national debt, and he really was for the American people in regards to that stance. So the bank's wars, lasting implications. To weaken the bank before his charter ran out, Jackson ordered that all U.S. government deposits be withdrawn and deposited in various state charter banks. In response, Biddle restricted the bank loans, tightening the nation's money supply in an effort to inspire public outrage towards Jackson policies and forced a recharter. Instead, the ensuing financial distress inspired greater suspicion of the bank's power. See, so people started to understand too under Jackson that the bank had a lot of power in regards to how they affected the economy. So you see, Biddle, he wanted to get a recharter for this bank. So what he was doing was playing with people's interests, rates, and also playing with the money supply, and it was causing people to have some suspicion for the bank's power. So the charter of the Second Bank of the United States expired in 1836, and the defeated Biddle accepted an offer from Pennsylvania to turn it into a state chartered bank. With the removal of the bank as regulating force, state banks began printing currency and lending money in exorbitant amounts. The resulting high inflation and Jackson policies favoring hard currency, gold or silver, led many investors to panic and many banks to close due to insufficient reserves in a financial crisis known as the Panic of 1837. And at the same time, they tried to destabilize America by raising racial tensions in the South. Many abolitionists were paid agents by the international bankers to write essays about how the slaves were mistreated in the 1800s, even though they didn't really care about the slaves. They just used these essays to cause um, more antipathy. They just wanted they really wanted a civil war. They really want the South to have a succession from the Union, and so they could put their own individual um, national bank in each state, make each state a city state. So then they could do that way. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Jackson's Democratic successor, Martin Van Buren, proposed the establishment of a new independent treasury system, which would fulfill Jackson's goal of separating the nation's finances from its government. Repealed by the Whigs in 1841 after Van Buren's loss to William Henry Harrison, the Independent Treasury Act was signed back into law by Democratic President James K. Polk in 1846. The independent treasury system would function until 1914 when it was replaced by the Federal Reserve. And then at the same time, like I said, Northern abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony, they would write letters and they essays and really spark the mind of the North to try to abolish slavery in the United States. But they, I believe some of them had pure intentions, but they were also doing it under the guise of influenced by the international bankers. And the Southern pro slavery advocates, like the Knights of the Golden Circle, they also wanted to succeed from the Union so they could have their own government. And it was with slavery. And the South has so much revenue that they could actually do it because they were creating a lot of the revenue for the United States economy. And like I said before, the international bankers wanted to put a central bank in each southern state and to make them private city states so they could get each state in their own debt and make money off them. So the South threatened to take away the money they were generating for the Union. Abraham Lincoln couldn't allow that. So that's what really started the Civil War. It wasn't necessarily about slavery. I think a lot of people already know that. It was about money. And just like all wars are always about money or natural resources. That's what wars are fought about. So now let's skip on. So now we're going to 1907. This is J.P. Morgan. A lot of people know about J.P. Morgan and his investment banks and his his economic influence of today. This is him back in the 1900s. So this was the Panic of 1907, was a financial crisis that almost crippled the American economy. Now, this was J.P. Morgan. He would start rumors that banks were insolvent, and insolvent, meaning that, generally speaking, insolvency refers to a situation where a debtor cannot pay the debt she owes. For instance, a troubled company may become insolvent when it's unable to repay its creditors money owed on time, often leading to a bankruptcy filing. So when I say that, he would make a rumor that these American banks were insolvent, saying that if you wanted, let's say you had $10,000 in the bank and you went to the bank and asked to take it out, they would not have it available. That's what he would say, and he was right, because banks, they use the money that you save in their in your savings account. They use that money to loan it out to different people, to so they could start businesses or buy homes, and then they charge those people with interest. That's how banks make money. So if all the people went to the bank at one time and said, I want my money back, they wouldn't be able to do that. Even today, if you said, I want all my money, the bank would need a few days to get that ready for you. They couldn't just do it on the spot. So JP Morgan was giving people that rumor that banks were becoming insolvent. And a lot of people got scared and they went to their banks and they started withdrawing a lot of their money, and that would cause a major bankruptcy in a lot of the economy, and a lot of the people who borrowed those loans. Because if you went to the bank, all these people went to the bank and got their money back from their savings account. All the banks that were issuing loans, they had to receive those loans back. So they would have the people say, hey, you got to pay my loan back. And of course, they wouldn't be able to pay it. So they would have to file bankruptcy, or they would have to lose their home, their foreclosed, or lose their business, or lose their land. And so the property value would go down. And so what would happen is that the property value would go down. So these rich people like J.P. Morgan or John D. Rockefeller or the Rothschild, they would buy this land for cheap, or these property for cheap, and it caused so much of a destabilization of the economy. And this was what the Panic of 1907 was about. So major New York banks were on the verge of bankruptcy, and there was no mechanism to rescue them until Morgan stepped in to help resolve the crisis. Treasury Secretary George B. Cortelyou earmarked $35 million of federal money to deposit it in New York banks. Morgan then met with the nation's leading financiers in New York Mansion, where he forced them to devise a plan to meet the crisis. James Stillman, president of the National City Bank, also played a central role. Morgan organized a team of bank and trust executives, which redirected money between banks, secured further international lines of credit, and bought up the plummeting stocks of healthy corporations. So J.P. Morgan was trying to get the people to lose faith in the banks, or the state banks, so they would want a larger banking system, because he was used by the international bankers to do this. So in 1910, there was a meeting on Jekyll Island. This was a secret gathering at a secluded island off the coast of Georgia. In 1910, laid the foundation of the Federal Reserve System. So in November 1910, six men, Nelson Aldrich, A. Piatt, Andrew Henry Davison, Arthur Shelton, Frank Vanderlip, and Paul Warburg, met at Jekyll Island Club off the coast of Georgia to write a plan to reform the nation's banking system. The meeting and its purpose was closely guarded secrets, and participants did not admit that the meeting occurred until the 1930s. But the plan written on Jekyll Island laid a foundation for what eventually be the Federal Reserve System. And as we talked about before, the Federal Reserve System was passed by the 63rd United States Congress and signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson on December 23rd, 1913. The law created the Federal Reserve System, the central banking system of the United States. So this was the way to get the American citizens to give up their capital goods, like gold and silver, and substitute them with fiat money as the Federal Reserve note, which became known as the US dollar. So the Federal Reserve was able to print off the dollars or print out the notes, and then this became the US dollar. That's what we use today. So the Federal Reserve now can print money if needed, cause inflation, and take back money if needed to cause deflation. And they do that in the economy. They still do that today. So the United States emerged from World War I with the world's largest and most vibrant economy. The Federal Reserve banks had substantial gold reserves and discount loans to their member banks. A modest gold outflow and rising inflation prompted the Fed to increase its discount rate sharply in 1920. The price level then began to fall and U.S. economy entered a recession. So everyone was getting into the economy. Everybody was getting into the stock market. This is called the Roaring Twenties. Everybody was getting into it. It wasn't just the rich; it was also just the common man. And uh, um, eventually, it led to an overhaul, and a lot of the prices and the interest rates started to become so burdensome, and the loans uh, started to become unable to be repaid. There was a They started doing a kind of a predatory lending type stuff with the banks where people would get these loans or people would invest so much in their savings, their whole life account in the stock market, and then it would drop. It would, because that's what the stock market does from time to time. People panic, would take their money out at low value, or they'll sell it at low value. A lot of and the rich, they would buy it for cheap. So again, it was like 1907 with J.P. Morgan, where it's like they would cause these crises. The poor would panic and make drastic decisions, and they would lose a lot of their value, while the rich still got richer because they would buy the property for cheap. So they were doing it again in the 1930s when it started. And the president at that time was Herbert Hoover. He believed that we could just hold things out and things will eventually pass. But with this Great Depression, a lot of people started to die because of the food shortage and famines, and just inability to pay for food. Um, so eventually, he lost his presidency to Franklin D. Roosevelt, and we'll see what happened. So, what caused the Great Depression throughout the 1920s? The U.S. economy expanded rapidly. The nation's total wealth more than doubled between 1920 and 1929, a period dubbed the Roaring Twenties. The stock market, centered at the New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street in New York City, was the scene of reckless speculation where everyone from millionaire tycoons to cooks and janitors poured their savings into stocks. As a result, the stock market underwent rapid expansion, reaching its peak in August 1929. And also they were doing 24 call loans where it's basically you would give someone a loan, and they would pay, let's say, like if the loan is $10, you pay $1, and the company or another investor will pay $9. So you would get this loan, and eventually you would think, oh, I could pay this back later. But then they will call 24 hours, so they'll contact you and say you need to pay this loan back now. And of course, the people couldn't do it, so they would default on the loan and go bankrupt. And it caused a lot of people to go bankrupt. It caused a lot of depression in the economy, and that's what started to lead. It was a lot of predatory lending, a lot of just um, destructive stuff in the economy. It just wasn't good for the American people. So let's see what happens. In the fall of 1930, the first of four waves of banking panics began as large numbers of investors lost confidence in solvency of their banks and demanded deposits in cash, forcing banks to liquidate loans in order to supplement their insufficient cash reserves on hand. Bank runs swept the United States again in the spring of fall 1931 and the fall of 1932, and by 1933, thousands of banks had closed their doors. So then Franklin D. Roosevelt, soon after taking office in March 1933, President Roosevelt declared a nationwide bank moratorium in order to prevent a run on the banks by consumers lacking confidence in the economy. He also forbade banks to pay out gold or to export it. And in January 1934, the act was the culmination of Roosevelt's controversial gold program, Among other things, the act transferred ownership of all monetary gold in the United States to the U.S. Treasury and prohibited the Treasury and financial institutions from redeeming dollars for gold. So this was major. He basically got rid of the gold standard. He's like, we're not doing that anymore. It's not working anymore. We just need to really just have the Federal Reserve have print the money, because if you take out all the gold, now you put a price on how valuable your money is, because gold is out of your circulation now. So you have really nothing to compare it to except for silver. He actually took the silver too, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But once the gold is out the system or out your economy, you basically have the power to determine how much this paper is worth, this dollar bill is worth. So this was able to stabilize the economy, but at the same time, it plunged the United States into major debt because they had nothing to back the money off anymore. Or they did, they had the gold, but they were able to cause uh, amounts of inflation and basically cause the money to be level based off how they saw fit. The Federal Reserve has the power to determine how much the dollar bill is worth. And now that they have the gold, they can do whatever they want with that, and that's just going to be major. And also, FDR, he created a lot of the social reforms to get people to have a like a welfare mentality, not just helping the welfare, helping the people get back on their feet, but it got people a lot to be dependent on the government. And like I said, this is a common trend. They start the problem and they give you the solution. This is how they do it. This is the Hegelian dialectic. So now let's skip on. This is to June 4th, 1963. This is Kennedy. He signed the Public Law 88-36, which marked the beginning of the end for even the $1 silver certificate. The law authorized the Federal Reserve to issue $1 and $2 bills and revoked the silver purchase of 1934, which authorized the Secretary of Treasury to issue silver certificates, by now limited to the $1 denomination, because it would be several months before the new $1 Federal Reserve notes could enter circulation in quantity. There was a need to issue silver certificates in the interim, because the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 granted the right to issue silver certificates to the president. Kennedy issued Executive Order 11110 to delegate the authority to the Treasury Secretary during the transition. So Kennedy wanted to use silver to help with the economy. And it looks like it was just for temporary cause, but it was going to help um, get the economy back into a more stable state where the debt wouldn't be so bad. But as we see a few months later, in November of 1963, he was assassinated. Now, I'm not saying that they did it because he was trying to use the silver, but I mean, just put two and two together. I mean, it sounds pretty um, suspicious that he died the same year he tried to do this. And then once Lyndon B. Johnson, his vice president, became president in July 23rd, 1965, the same year the Civil Rights Act was passed, President Johnson approved the Coinage Act of 1965, which removed silver from circulating coins and authorized that clad coins be used for the half dollar, quarter, and dime. So now he got rid of all the silver. He brought all the silver back in. So now the Federal Reserve has the silver and the gold, and now it's all we have is dollar bills, and we have these coins made out of lesser valuable metals like nickel for the dime, the quarter, half quarter, and the nickel, and the penny is made out of copper. So we're no longer using gold and silver anymore, and we've been like that ever since. And if you study Roman history, you see that the decline of the Roman government or the Roman Empire started to decline as they started to stop using their coins, which were of heavy of a rare metal. I think it was gold or silver, and they started to mix it with a different alloy like nickel and copper, because the economy was slowly declining in the Roman Empire, and that's, that was the early sign that they're falling, and that's what America is doing. What they've been doing for the last 60, 70 years. So, and then as we talk about later in the early 2000s, you have something called predatory lending, where lending practices that impose unfair and abusive loan terms on borrowers, including high interest rates, high fees, and terms that strip the borrower of equity. Predatory lenders often use aggressive sales tactics and deception to get borrowers to take out loans they can't afford. And they did that big time in 2008 with the housing crisis, where they basically they gave out people loans for homes where they could buy nice homes, even though they didn't really have the means to pay back the loan. And then when the interest rates went higher, a lot of people had to default on their loan, and they foreclosed on their house. The property value goes low, and the rich investors who can't afford it, they buy the house for cheap. So like I said, they play these games with the American people. So the American people are being oppressed not by some invisible entity. They're being oppressed by the Federal Reserve. That's why if you wanted to get rid of the American debt and a lot of the economy issues, you got to get rid of the Federal Reserve. So that's why it's like don't you can't really trust what they say on the news when they talk about, oh, we're fighting the American debt, or Republicans say we're fighting the American debt and all that stuff. They're not, because they don't get rid of the Federal Reserve, because that's what's really causing a lot of these issues. So now we go into Bitcoin. This started right after the housing crisis in 2008. It was established by this man, or these unknown people named Satoshi Nakamoto. It's not really known if this is one person or not. It's not even known if this is his real name. It's just some entity that created this. Is Bitcoin, the first version of cryptocurrency. And I put this in here because cryptocurrency is the end goal for the international bankers, because people, they don't want to deal with cash anymore. You know, it's like this cash, this money system, these dollar bills is fiat currency. It doesn't really mean much. It's only valuable because the Federal Reserve says it has value. But we've been dealing with basically monopoly money. It's only based off what we've been told, and it's like we're not really having money. We don't really own currency. We own fiat money. So if the dollar ever drops to like a penny, which it could happen, is we have no power into that because we have no gold, we have no silver. So we're basically at the mercy of the Federal Reserve. And so that's why it's like, Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is going to be huge, because what they're using that for is to make everything digital, so people don't have to use cash anymore, because people still get paid under the table. People don't are getting paid with money, but they're not getting taxed on it. So what cryptocurrency is going to be able to do is to make everything digital and attract every purchase, because there are so many people in this world who don't have a bank account, they don't have a debit card, they don't have a credit card. So all those purchases, they're like, I think it's almost like 2 billion who don't have those things. So if 2 billion people are spending money, but you can't track it, you can't trace it. So that's what they want. They want to make everybody into a debt slave, or just to put everybody in debt so they can make money off that. So now the US is talking about making a fully digital US dollar. This happened in January 25th, 2022. This just happened. So the Fed released a study of potential contender cryptocurrency. Let's read a little bit. The Federal Reserve released a report last week for exploring opportunities to create a fully digital US dollar, which would serve as the most stable alternative to other digital forms of money like cryptocurrency, called central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. The currency will be equivalent to a digital form of paper money in the United States. Digital money is already prolific, with many modern transactions occurring over digital wallets and systems, because we have Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Google Pay, so it's all digital. According to an October 2021 piece by Harvard Business Review, over 97% of money in circulation is from online transactions. However, the digital money used is typically stored in a commercial bank ledger or a public ledger in the case of cryptocurrency. In contrast, CBDC would be a liability of the central bank, meaning it will be backed up and owned by the Federal Reserve. Currently, only physical cash is backed by the Federal Reserve. Again, the Federal Reserve is what's really causing the economy to be in debt. Like I said, the Federal Reserve is not part of the U.S. government. It is a private bank. It is not part of the government. They just call it the Federal Reserve to make people believe that it's part of the U.S. government. Also, consumer data would be within a reach of the federal government, which meaning it will also, which it will have to consider trade-offs between protecting personal privacy and deterring crime. Storing the data on government infrastructure may also make it susceptible to cyber attacks, potentially from foreign nations. No policy decisions are being made as of yet on the development of digital dollar, and the report is meant to advance the understanding and feasibility of CBDCs, according to the Fed or the Federal Reserve. All right. Now, this is something I want to put in here too. Uh, this right here. So this is the passport for the jab. They're able to put it on a chip so it can detect your status. The one thing about this chip, though, it doesn't just detect your status if you receive the jab. I don't want to say the infection jab, but it also can store your debit card, and it can store your credit card, your health history, your social security number. This is what the scriptures call the mark of the beast, what they're calling the COVID passport, but the scriptures call it the mark of the beast. So this is what's coming, and this is what you know. This is what, like I said before, they start the panic, they start the conflict, and they give you the solution. All right. So this is it, Revelation chapter 13, 15. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the beast or image of the beast should be killed. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 600 three score and six. So this was coming. So a lot of people they feel like they're going to be able to escape the money system. You got to have faith, man. It's like you can't escape prophecy. This is what is already written. But just understand, like I said, they start the problem, they give you the solution. We saw what the problem was in 2020, and they're already planning the solution. So I expect that to roll out sooner than later. But I would tell people to have faith, and you know make sure to use the system, but don't get used by it. It's important to have money, like the scriptures say, money answereth all things, but you don't want to have the love of the money. The love of money is the root of all evil because it makes you do things that a normal person would not do. Money will make a person sell their body. It makes them sell their family, makes them kill, makes them steal because of the money, the love for it. So, it's important that we have money. It's important that we know how to use it, how to make it, so we can take care of ourselves, take care of our families. But it's important not to be used by it. So, as this cryptocurrency rolls out, we have to be strategic and understand what it's about and how to make a profit off it. But we have to understand what are the ramifications if we get so drawn into it. So we have to be careful. But like I said, have faith in the Most High, and I pray that somebody got something out of this. All right, peace.